Daf Yomi, Tractate Zevachim, page 52b. Top of the page with the words V'she'enu nishar lo imatzeh. And that which does not remain, meaning, if there is no blood remaining, he shall not squeeze it out. This indicates that failure to squeeze the blood does not disqualify the offering. The Gemara answers, there are two Tanaim, and they disagree with regard to the opinion of Ishmael. Amar Rabbi Bar Chama, Haytana Savar Shirai Makvi, V'Tanya Kohen Hamechate Ota. Ota Shenitan Damalemala V'Lo Ota Shenitan Damalemata. The Gemara continues its discussion of the remainder of the blood. Rabbi Bar Chama says this following Tana holds that failure to pour the remainder of the blood of offerings whose blood is sprinkled inside the sanctuary disqualified the offering, as it is taught in a Braita, the priest that sacrifices it for sin shall eat it. Leviticus 6:19. The verse states the word "it" to teach that the offering whose blood was sprinkled correctly above the red line of the altar is valid, and the priest may eat the meat. But this is not so for an offering whose blood was sprinkled below the red line, which is disqualified. Let's see here. Below the red line, which is disqualified. Amret v'chimyayin bata bichlal shenemar miklal shenemar dam zevachecha yishafech al mizbach v'gomer lemadnu shenitanim b'mata matan arba im natana b'matana achat kiper yachol af hanitanin lemara shenatanan lemata kiper. Braita continues, you said this but from where did you come? In other words, why would one think that such an offering is valid? So, the verse needs to teach that it is not. The Braita explains, from the fact that it is stated, and you shall offer your burnt offerings, the flesh and the blood, upon the altar of the Lord your God. Okay, those guys were a little bit disturbing there. Here in Jerusalem, you have a lot of motorcycle guys, and they just delivering food and stuff. They were just decided to park over there. So, anyway, where was I? Where were we? Okay, the Braita continues. Amart ki ma'ayin batza b'klal shenemar dam zevachachi shafech al mizbeach v'gomer lemanu l'nitanim b'mati arba she'im natanan b'matana achas kiper b'lechol af hanitanin lemala shenatan lemata kiper. The Braita continues, you said this, but from where did you come? In other words, why would one think that such an offering is valid? So that the verse needs to teach that it is not. The Braita explains from the fact that it is stated, and you shall offer your burnt offerings, the flesh and the blood, upon the altar of the Lord your God. And the blood of your offerings shall be poured out against the altar of the Lord your God, and you shall eat the flesh. Deuteronomy 12:27. We learned that with regard to those offerings whose blood is placed with 4 placements on the corners of the altar, that if the priest placed them with only 1 placement, he has effected atonement. Therefore, since it is derived that the priest does not present the blood on the specified corners of the altar, the offering is nevertheless valid. One might have thought that the blood should not have been placed above the red line, but that one places below the red line affects atonement as well, and the offering is valid. flies. So it's not one thing, it's another. Let's see. Vidinhu. Maybe. Over there will be the solution. Vidinhu. Nemru damim. Maybe over here. Ay. See? Interesting vibe. Different vibe. Okay. See here. Vidinhu. We're holding by Vidinhu. Vidinhu ne'emru damim lemala ve'ne'emru damim lematan ma damim ha'emurim lematan shinatan lemalan lo kiper av damim ha'emurim lemalan im natan lematan lo kiper. The Brisa continues, and it would seem that there is a logical inference to counter this logic. It is stated that blood is to be sprinkled above the red line, referring to the blood of an animal sin offering, which is to be sprinkled on the corners of the upper half of the altar, and it is stated that the blood is to be sprinkled below the red line, referring to the blood of a bird sin offering, which is to be sprinkled on the lower half of the altar. Just as with regard to the blood about which it is stated that it is to be below the red line, if it is a case where one places it above the red line, it does not affect atonement, as the sages derived from the verse, and he shall sprinkle of the blood of the sin offering upon the side of the altar, and the remainder of the blood shall be squeezed out at the base of the altar. It is a sin offering. Leviticus 5:9. So too, with regard to the blood about which it is stated that it is to be above the red line, if it is a case where one placed it below the red line, it does not affect atonement. Lo, im amarta betachtoinim, shenitare b'netina lamala shem tzloiva namalan, lo kiper, tomar melionim, shenatana lamata sheyesh behen kanav lamata. The logical inference is rejected. No. If you said that this is the halacha with regard to the blood of a bird sin offering, which is to be sprinkled below the red line, that was placed in the placement above the red line, that may be because they will not ultimately be sprinkled above. For this reason, it does not affect atonement. Shall you also say that this is the halacha with regard to the blood that is to be sprinkled above the red line, meaning the blood of an animal sin offering, but which one placed below the red line, that it will not affect atonement? The blood that is to be sprinkled above the red line is different, as some of it is sacrificed below the red line, when the remainder of the blood is poured on the base of the altar. Damim shirayim apnimim yochichu sheyesh lahen krav b'chutz ve'im natan betchila b'chut lo kiper. The Brisa responds, the blood that is placed inside the sanctuary will prove it, as some of it is sacrificed outside, but if the priest initially placed the blood on the inside, on the altar outside the sanctuary, it does not affect atonement. Lo, im amarta b'damim ha'penimi, im shem mizbeach ha'penimi merkan, toman be'elyonim, sheharei kranot marakot otan, the Brisa rejects this proof. No, if you said that this is the halakha with regard to the blood that is placed inside the sanctuary, concerning which the inner altar does not complete the atonement, as they require additional blood placements, shall you also say that this is the halakha with regard to the blood offered above the red line, meaning the blood of an animal sin offering, concerning which the corners of the altar complete the atonement? Accordingly, it is possible to say that if one placed them below the red line, they are valid. Talmud Lomo. אותה. אותה שניתן דמים למעלה, ולא שניתן דמים למטה. The Bride concludes, to counter this reasoning, the verse states, with regard to an animal sin offering that is sacrificed outside, the priest that sacrifices it for sin shall eat it. Leviticus 6:19. To emphasize that the offering whose blood was placed correctly above the red line on the altar is valid, and the priest may eat the meat. But this is not so for an offering whose blood was placed below the red line, which is disqualified. My shame is American Lav Elu Shiraim. Rabbi Mercham proves his point. What does the right mean when it says, if you said that this is the halakha with regard to the blood that is placed inside the sanctuary, concerning which the inner altar does not complete the atonement? What is required to complete the atonement? Is it not referring to this remainder of the blood, and it is teaching that failure to pour the remainder of the blood on the base of the altar disqualifies the offering? Amar le Rava ihachi tesi b'kal v'chomer. Rava said to Rabbi Merchama, if so, that the Tana of the Braita holds that failure to pour the remainder of the blood of the offerings whose blood is sprinkled inside the sanctuary disqualifies the offering, you could derive the halacha that if the priest sprinkled the blood below the red line, the offering is disqualified via an a fortiori inference. Just with regards to the remainder of the blood of the offering to the inner altar, concerning which their ultimate right, pouring on the base of the altar, is obligatory on the external altar, but if the priest initially performed the rite of placing the blood on the external altar, it does not affect atonement with regard to those offerings whose blood is placed above the red line. Concerning their ultimate rite, pouring on the base of the altar is not obligatory below the red line of the altar, and the priest initially performed the rite of placing the blood below the red line, is it not logical that it does not affect atonement? Since the rite that it does not advance this claim, but derive the halakha from a verse, this indicates that pouring the remainder of the blood is not obligatory. Ela en mizbeach haflimi b'merkam b'dvad ela peroiches. It continues, rather, when the rite states that the blood of the offerings offered inside the sanctuary are those concerning which the inner altar does not complete atonement. It means that the inner altar does not complete the atonement alone, but rather requires that blood also be sprinkled inside the sanctuary on the curtain separating the sanctuary and Holy of Holies. Im kiper kilo, im lo kiper lo kilo. Divrei Rabbi Akiva. Amar lo Yehuda mipnei ma lo ne'emar im kila kiper, im lo kila lo kiper. She'im kiser b'kol achas b'kol mim batonos lo asav lo klum. The sages taught a bride to the verse states concerning the sacrificial rite performed by the high priest on Yom Kippur. And when he has finished atoning for the sanctuary and the tent of meeting and the altar, he shall present a live goat. Leviticus 16:20. This verse indicates that if he performed the atonement, he has finished his service, but if he did not perform the atonement, he has not finished. This is the statement of Rabbi Akiva. Rabbi Yehuda said to him, for what reason do we not say, if it is finished, he has performed the atonement, but if he did not finish, he has not performed the atonement? This derivation would indicate that if one of any of the blood placements is lacking, it is as though he did nothing. My benayu, Rabbi Yochanan, Rabbi Yehoshua ben Levi, Chadamar, Mashmaut Dorshin Ika benayu, Chadamar Shiraim Akvin Ika benayu. The Gemara clarifies two opinions. What is the difference between them? Rabbi Yochanan and Rabbi Yehoshua ben Levi engaged in a dispute concerning this. One says that interpretation of the meaning of the verse is the difference between them, meaning there is no halakhic difference between them, and only a dispute as to how to interpret the verses. And one says that there is a difference between them with regard to whether failure to pour the remainder of the blood at the base of the altar disqualifies the offering. According to Rabbi Akiva, it does not disqualify the offering. whereas Rabbi Yehuda maintains that it does disqualify the offering. Tistayim Yehoshua ben Levi, who the Amar Shiraim de Makvi, the Amar Yehoshua ben Levi, the Omer Shiraim de Makvin, maybe Par Echad, Umatchila Bifnim. The Gemara suggested maybe concluded that Rabbi Yehoshua ben Levi is the one who says that Rabbi Kiva and Rabbi Yehuda disagree as to whether or not failure to pour the remainder of the blood on the altar disqualifies an offering, as Rabbi Yehoshua ben Levi says, according to the statement of the one who says that failure to pour the remainder of the blood on the base of the altar disqualifies the offering if the priest finished placing the blood in the inner altar. The blood was spilled before he poured the remainder on the external altar. He must bring one bull and slaughter it and begin the sprinkling of the blood as he did initially on the inner altar, so that there will be blood remaining from the sprinkling, and then he pours the remainder of the blood on the external altar. Rabbi Yehoshua ben Levi discusses the opinion that failure to pour the remainder of the blood on the base of the altar disqualifies the offering, apparently in reference to the Braita cited here. Atu Rabbi Yochanan Lesley Hasvara v'Amar Rabbi Yochanan Tanan Rabbi Nechemia Kedivre Omer Shirai Mi'akavin. The Gemara asks, is that to say that Rabbi Yochanan does not agree with this reasoning, but doesn't Rabbi Yochanan himself say on 111a, Rabbi Nechemia taught a halacha in accordance with the statement of the one who says that failure to pour the remainder of the blood disqualifies the offering? Rabbi Yochanan also discusses the opinion of a Tana who holds that failure to pour the remainder of blood disqualifies the offering, apparently in reference to the Braita cited here. Rather, there is no proof that Rabbi Yochanan is referring to the dispute between Rabbi Kiva and Rabbi Yehuda. He is stating halacha in accordance with the statement of the one who says that it disqualifies the offering, whether the Tana may be, but he is not referring to the dispute between these Tanaim. Here too, Rabbi Yehoshua ben Levi is stating a halacha in accordance with the statement of the one who says that it disqualifies the offering, whichever Tana that it may be, but he is not referring to the dispute between these Tanaim. And that concludes the Talmud for that, and we start the new Mishnah on the bottom of 52b. The Mishnah, new Mishnah. Chatois hatzibur ve'yachid, elu hein chatois hatzibur, seirei roshei chadashim, v'shel moadot, shchitatan b'tzafon, v'kibul daman b'chli sharet b'tzafon, v'daman ta'un arba matanot, al arba kranot ketzad. These are the halachot of the communal and the individual sin offerings. These are the communal sin offerings, goats of the new moon and of the festivals. Their slaughters in the north of the temple courtyard, and the collection of their blood in a service vessel is in the north. And their blood requires 4 placements on the 4 corners of the altar. How did the priest do so?